Hey team, welcome to our second to last session of the day. So next up, we've got Julia Steffen, who is the principal content designer at Varus. Julia has over a decade of experience in the world of content, and in her talk, she's going to give us the tools, resources, and processes we need to really up our content game. Fun fact, Julia loves to write humour pieces and is published in the New Yorker and McSweeney's. Pretty impressive. Over to you, Julia.
Hi, thank you for that intro. Let me cue up my talk. All right. Hopefully this is queuing up right now. Awesome. Let me get into presenter view. And here we go. Let's see. All right. So I thank you for the intro. I'm currently working at Varus, which is a startup that I'm excited to introduce to the world very soon. Before that, I worked at Grubhub, and before that, I worked at MetaLab, which is a product design agency that focuses a lot on startups. So with that, I have a lot of content design experience and excited to talk to y'all today about content design for startups, how to work lean, have maximum impact, and get all the high fives. So why should you care about content design? You're here, so hopefully you already do. But in case somebody asks you when you get back to work or asks you on the street, which would be very odd, but in case they do, content design is product success. Every impact you care about in product design is impacted by content. An example I like to use to show this are these two screens from Google Maps. The first one was then optimized to the second screen, and with what seemingly are some subtle changes, increased the opt-in rate by 32%, which, as we all know, is pretty awesome. We'll dive into what the changes are a little bit later in the chat, but I'd like to use this as an example. So we're talking about startups here. So we need to work lean. And so let's focus on the must-haves. And the must-haves are voice, tools for efficiency, words in the experience, and ways to check, test, and perfect your words. Starting with voice. So why is voice important? Voice tells you, your users, who you are, creates a connection with your users, and signals if they can trust you or not. And I think I just got a chat, so I'm going to reformat my slides. Hold on just a second, y'all. And thank you for your patience. Oh, I think this looks better, y'all. Thank you so much for working with me through that. Okay, so voice tells your users who you are, creates the connections with your users, and signals if they can trust you or not. And thank you for liking the skull, which is pretty crux. So what does voice look like in an interface? So here's two examples that are different, but are both from fintech. So the example on the left is Clio, which has more of a bold voice. They enjoy roasting their users, and users enjoy being roasted. And Wells Fargo, which is more of a traditional voice. Both of these are good voices. They're used to attract different types of audiences. And let's look at them in a little bit more detail. I'm going to read to you from the screens. So Clio uses chat to talk to its users. So Clio prompts with, how much money did you put in your wallet in February? And then the user responds 0. And then Clio responds with a GIF, a reaction GIF from Arrested Development, laughing hysterically at the user, and then says, correct, double that and you'll get $0 a year. But it then does prompt the user to use their autosave function. So it's pretty funny, pretty fun, definitely going for a specific audience. And then Wells Fargo has a conversational voice too. It says, how can we help? And it says, get a private student loan. But it's definitely different, a little bit more traditional. So how do you choose a voice for your startup, or how do you refine the voice for your startup? Well, first off, you need to do a competitor audit. This is something you should already be doing for design, for features you want to do, is seeing what the competitors are doing. But now you just kind of want to do it from a content lens. So again, this should be pretty efficient because you're already doing it. And then say you were doing Clio, you might go check out Monzo, which is in the fintech space, Wells Fargo, as we spoke about, and just look at their voice and see if there's white space that you can differentiate yourself. You also need to create your voice, you need to do research. So go talk to your research team, learn what your audience will respond to and will like. And something that can make this even easier is Maze, which is a user testing tool, has a whole bank of templates to use for things like this and other content elements. So you can just get in there and do it quickly. Also, to define your voice, you need to map to your values. So this is from Atlassian's design system, and they say one of their values is open company, no bullshit, which is fun to read and on a speaker stage. And so perhaps if you were writing for a voice for Atlassian, you may choose not to be as chatty and, as Clio is. You might be more direct. And so that's how that would factor in. So your product voice is your values plus space to differentiate plus what research teaches you. So you may say, all right, we've got a product voice. My voice is clear and human, to which I will say, it's 2022, my dude, and clear and human is table stakes. No one is going to say, I really want an interface that's confusing and robotic. That's my favorite. So these are good things to be, but these are at the minimum. And so you're going to need to find something that's going to differentiate you a little bit more. If you're confused or like, I don't know where to start to document my voice, there is another resource that's great to steal from, still like an artist or still like a content designer. So this resource, as well as all the other resources I'm speaking to and some articles, I'll provide in a list in the chat after the talk. But this one is awesome. I go check it out all the time. And this is just one of the awesome things they have. And it's a list of a lot of different voices from a lot of awesome products. And so you can go kind of check out how they have formatted their voice, still their format, plug and play with your information, and you're good to go. So we talked about the importance of being, clear. With product design, we can't be confusing. And as product design, generally you don't have that much space. So where are the places you can lean into voice? Notifications. Notifications are a great place to lean into voice. Email, push, SMS. This is a great example of Imager, who's, sending a push notification at 6:15, maybe done with the work, trying to bring you back into the app with a Lionel Richie joke that people here may be too young to get, but I am not too young to get. Success states are another awesome place to really lean into your voice. This is one of the most famous success states. It's, the MailChimp monkey high five. And so success states are a great place to celebrate. Something to note is MailChimp found in their research that sending out an email, deploying an email, is really stressful, right? Like you can have a typo and you can't pull it back. So they found having this kind of joy and this kind of confirmation reduced that anxiety and made the experience better, made a good connection. Empty states are another awesome place to lean into voice. And this is like my favorite. It's an old one from Webflow, where they really speak internet-y of the time, like, the new project button must be important. So MDC is a great place to educate, lean into voice, and I'm making a guess here, but I'm wondering if this fun voice is also masking that this might have been an early UX issue where you didn't immediately go into your new product, and so they kind of leaned into voice to still make the experience awesome. Placeholder text. Another awesome place to do voice. I do want to give a caveat. Any form should always be accessible, should always be labeled well, and if you've got that covered, play with the placeholder text. This is an example from OkCupid back in the day when they were, telling you the social norm was to brag. Go ahead on and brag a little about yourself. We won't judge. And onboarding is the final example I'm going to give for places to lean into voice. There used to be a dandruff commercial that said you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And that's been sticky enough that I'm going to creep you all out and talk about dandruff here. So this is an example from Lemonade, which is an insurance company. It's trying to reframe how we might think of as kind of a boring industry by using some language that is really conversational and very positive with I'll get you an awesome price in seconds. So these are some great places to lean into voice. And so go check where, your startup now, places in your product design now, and these places, see if you can refine it. If you haven't started yet, mark these as places to add a lot of joy or reduce anxiety. So we spoke about voice. Now let's talk about tools for efficiency. If you had all the time in the world and all the resources in the world, you still probably want to be efficient. But if you're a startup, you really, really want to be efficient. And one of the best ways to be efficient is to create a style guide. A style guide is just the rules you have for your words. Do you use title case? Do you use sentence case? What pronouns do you use in your interface? Do you say PM with capital P? Just rules like that. And you also may say, well, there are a lot of rules like that. How's that being efficient to document all this? And to which I'll say, I got you. Actually, I don't got you. Quinn Keith's got you, the Writer app got you, and Misfit Content has you. The example I'm showing on the screen is Quinn Keith's product language framework, and it is a style guide meant to copy and paste and use yourself. It's very comprehensive. You can personalize it if you want, but it has a great place to just start from a start, and you don't have to build it yourself. The Writer app has a similar functionality, and we'll talk about that in a second. And Misfit Content also has something you can copy and paste. Again, these links and resources will be in the resource link I'll send at the end. You also need to create a glossary or language bank. And this should include branded terms you never use, and terms you heard your users say organically. An example of terms you never use, I was working on a startup a few years ago that was dealing with data. And we found in user interviews that anytime you said data, and maybe even when I said data to y'all right now, the hairs on our users' necks stood up and they wanted to have nothing to do with the product. So we found better ways to say that and documented not to say data. Also, you want to use terms you hear your user say organically, because these should be the terms in your interface. These are terms that provide no friction because everyone knows they know what you're talking about. Don't increase cognitive load, and you want to document them to make sure that you're using them. This is an example of from Adobe. It's their in-product word list in their design system. And a word they never use is blacklist. And they say to avoid it because it has roots in racism and oppression. And they give it examples of words to replace it with. If you want inspiration, they have a great in-product list, and it's a great example of kind of what to use for your glossary. So if you want to be efficient, put your style guide in your design system or your UI kit. If you put your style guide somewhere else. It's kind of like you're reenacting the end scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they put the Lost Ark in a box and then like roll it to the end of a warehouse, never to be seen again. So we don't want that. We want people using our style guide because it makes it more efficient. So put it where PMs, where devs, designers are already looking, so they know to look at there. And if you want to like get to the next level, you can use the Writer app with Figma. This tool has a style guide in it. You can personalize it, has a glossary in it, and then has a Figma plugin that you can use that as you're designing will check that you're meeting your style guide, that you're not using a word out of your glossary, and it even checks for inclusivity, things like the term blacklist and things like that. Don't use that. Frontitude also has a similar plugin. And again, these links will be in the resources. I do want to say there is a cost to this plugin, so you have to weigh that value, but it's much nicer than having to double check and triple check. Also, if you have longer form content, and by this I mean like help center articles or transactional emails, pull your content into Hemingway app, and it'll check for passive voice, hard to parse sentences, and overall readability and other elements like this. And I'll also say, I've been using Hemingway app for a while, so it's like I feel like an OG with it. But Grammarly is also getting to be rad, so that's also another tool you can use for efficiency to make sure you're doing some rad stuff. So we talked about voice. We talked about tools for efficiency. Now let's talk about writing the words, which are correct for doing content design. And I'm gonna give you some tips and tricks. Number one is be user-focused, which y'all are probably saying, duh. Everybody needs to be user-focused. But I find that this is something not as done as well as it should be. And a really easy way to scan for this is to see it on a screen level if you reference yourself, you reference your company. And so if, for instance, if you're saying Grubhub is, Varus introduces this feature. If you're ever doing that, step back and say, how can I reframe this to be about the user? This is also a pretty standard one, but always be clear. You got to kill your darlings. You may make the best joke in the world, but if a user can't understand what you're saying, it's wasted. Write like you're having a conversation with someone you like. And generally when I talk to some people I like, then I try to be clear so they understand me. So I would never say to someone in a conversation, processing documentation enabled. That would seem so weird. So don't use that in your interface either. If another way to framing this is saying, write like you're having a conversation with your grandmother, assuming that you like your grandmother. I like my grandmother. Also, another helpful hint is just to think like the best content designers. And I wish I had like a magic wand and I could just touch people's head and they would think like the best content designers. And I don't have that, but I do have this awesome worksheet that Jane Ruffino made. And it's called the Microcopy Canvas. And it is all the questions content designers think about on a screen level to make awesome content. This can seem overwhelming at first, but if you use it for a few screens, you'll start internalizing it and very quickly have some super, super rad content. It brings in questions like, what are emotions users are feeling? Kind of as we were talking about with the MailChimp and Monkey High Five, are they feeling a little anxious? Does this meet our style guide? And questions like this. And finally, as far as our tips for writing the words, become a warrior against lorem ipsum. I want to scream this from the mountaintops, y'all. If you're designing but have no words in it, you're making very pretty boxes. And what's more problematic is you're pushing your content questions downstream where they can be more of an issue. And this will show up in bloated flows, IA issues, flows not meeting each other. So anytime you see lorem ipsum, become a warrior against it. All right, now on to checking, testing, and perfecting that content. So we've got the voice, we've got the content in there, and now we want to make it's even radder. So an upstream way to check content is in your design review. So again, again, this is something you should already be doing as design review. So this should be pretty efficient. And all I'm asking is just to look with a content lens and be very intentional in your design review. And you may say, well, how do I do that? And then I remind you again of this awesome micro copy canvas that Jane Ruffino made. It's preloaded with the questions you would ask. What would a user expect here? Just straight up awesome questions like that can help lead your design review. So I promised I would dig a little further into this example that changed. And I would like to kind of pretend like we're doing a design review and we're looking at the first screen and things that we would kind of look at to want to change to get that 32% opt-in rate change. So first, there is the header. And the first header is get the most from Google Maps. And you might want to say here, that's pretty good, but could you add a little more oomph, which is like the worst thing people say, but we do say it in design reviews, don't we? And they changed it to get more magic out of Google Maps. These are going to be the biggest change. And here we go. It says, Google needs to periodically store your location to improve your route recommendations, search suggestions, and more. And here in the design review, I would say, okay, it sounds like we're talking a lot about ourselves and not being user-focused. And when is the last time you said to your grandmother you would like to periodically store something? So can we make this a little bit easier? And you can see what they changed it to something much more user-focused. Discover, see suggestions for places to explore based on where you've been. Jane Ruffino's micrographic canvas talks really well about this, but the CTA changes are really crux too, especially since Google's design system has buttons in all caps. It looks like you're yelling, yes, I'm in. And I don't know if anybody really felt emotionally they wanted to say, yes, I'm in at that point. And then so they change it to start by turning on location history, which is probably more where you are emotionally and where you are in the customer journey as far as Google Maps does. You haven't signed it on yet. You're not ready to yell from the mountaintops that you are in. I'd like to show something else super smart that this team did. And it's they kind of figure out what might make users nervous and go ahead and address it in a very subtle way. So they've added some supplementary copy that says, create a private map of where you go with your signed in device. So this is going to reduce anxiety, right? Like your map isn't public. Everybody doesn't know that you go to Starbucks 7 times a day and then judge you for it. It's private. And also they're not tracking you when you're not signed in. So we've gone through design review, made our content more awesome. And now you can, a little further downstream, user test for clarity and affinity. Should already be user testing. Just do it through a content lens. And again, Maze has some awesome templates if you need some help with this. And then make sure content stuff is in your dashboards. You should be, checking on your success metrics, your KPIs, your OKRs. So this isn't new, and the content stuff that you're going to put in your dashboard is probably not new either. For instance, you want to be looking at onboarding flows and abandonment rates, notification metrics, feature adoption, conversion rates. So these should all look really familiar. But again, I'm going to ask you to look at it through a content lens. If in an onboarding flow you have a high abandonment rate, then perhaps your value proposition isn't written that well, and users don't know what they're getting out of it. And maybe you're talking too much about yourself or in a way that your grandmother doesn't understand, or a way, or despite Michael's screaming, they're not having a mobile phone. So go in and see if this is where you can really have big impact with content. And then again, this is something else you should already be doing. Feed this into your prioritization and planning. Figure out which of these content changes are going to have the biggest impact on your product. Prioritize it in such, and then open up the champagne and get ready for the high fives. Thank y'all.